Well, for some analysis, I'm joined in studio by our international affairs editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, it's fair to say Iraq is no stranger to political crisis. How does this differ to those that have come before?
Well, Karis was saying in that report that this political crisis goes back to elections last October, but it really depends what you mean by crisis, because in a way there's been a crisis of political divisions and a very fragmented state since 2003. So that's almost 20 years of a process which has led to what one Iraqi political veteran now describes as a country run on greed and corruption with no one thinking about the future and a dysfunctional state. That has been a long time in the making. But if we take this immediate crisis, it's true that these last 10 months do mark the longest period of turmoil of its kind since the US-backed election of 2005. And the effects of this crisis, has to be said, Sharon, are really desultory. The big problem being that the budget for 2022 was not passed. That's despite the opportunity of a surge in oil prices, so there could have been a windfall. But instead, that opportunity has gone to waste, and instead Iraqis are facing shortages of fuel and grain and really disastrous public services and crumbling infrastructure. I mean, it's almost 50 degrees centigrade in the south of the country right now. Imagine people having to live through that with power cuts because the power grid isn't working.
And Armen, is it believed at this point that Iran is playing any kind of role in what's happening there in terms of the crisis?
Well, Iran was mentioned a lot, wasn't it, in that report that we just heard in its support for one of these political blocs. Just to zoom out for a second, you've got to bear in mind that Iran's big goal is to reduce American influence. So there are still US troops in Iraq, and the Iranian supreme leader has set out the strategic goal of expelling the US military from the region. So whatever Iran does in Iraq, it's going to have a lot to do with that goal. Now, Iran did actually did agree to back Mustafa al-Kadhimi for the post of prime minister in Iraq, but only because the other options either fell through or they were not, or they were going to be too pro-American for Tehran's liking. But what Iran has seen since Mustafa al-Kadhimi came into office is that he has actually brought Iraq closer to some of Iran's rivals, the Gulf Arab states, and also Kadhimi has brought Iraq closer to Saudi Arabia, which is Iran's great rival. So he's been rebalancing Iraq's foreign relations in a way that has definitely destabilized Tehran. So Tehran sees a big challenge has seen how the premiership of al-Kadhimi has actually turned out to be a big challenge. And on top of that, Tehran now has to navigate this standoff between the Sadrist movement and the anti-Sadrists. And of course, Tehran doesn't know how that will play out, ultimately whether the outcome of that struggle in Iraq is going to be somehow favorable to Iran or not.
Okay, and in the meantime, that sit-in continuing at the Parliament there in Baghdad. Thanks for that, Armen. That's our international affairs editor here at France 24, Armen Georgian.